7 ancient empires brought back to life. Some of them are still here today, though in forms almost unrecognizable from their glory days. Others once stood as the greatest powers on earth, only to vanish into ruins and memory. From warriors to builders to philosophers, each left a mark on history. Stay with us until the end. The final empire on this list was so powerful and advanced that for centuries, outsiders refused to believe its people could have built it at all. Some even believed it to be built through supernatural guidance. Let's get into the video. Ancient Greece began to take shape around 800 BCE, rising from the shadows of the Dark Ages. By the 5th century BCE, Athens had entered its golden age, a time of dazzling democracy, soaring temples like the Parthenon, and philosophers whose ideas still echo today. The Greeks developed theater, pioneered mathematics, and laid the foundations of science and medicine. Their achievements spread through poetry, art, and philosophy, reaching far beyond their borders. Greek architecture influenced Rome, and through Rome, the entire Western world. But Greece's greatness wasn't just in thought and art, it was in rivalry and war. United, the Greek city-states resisted the might of the Persian Empire, achieving stunning victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea. Yet their greatest enemies often came from within. Athens and Sparta tearing each other apart in the Peloponnesian War, draining their strength. Innovation was their strength, but disunity was their fatal flaw. Eventually, Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander took Greece beyond its borders, creating an empire that stretched to India. When Rome absorbed Greece centuries later, Greek culture didn't die. It was reborn inside Rome itself. Today, ruins like the Parthenon remind us of their legacy, and the very word history is theirs, historia, meaning inquiry. The Assyrians began as a small kingdom around 2500 BCE, but by the 9th century BCE, they had transformed into the terror of the ancient world. At their height, their empire stretched from Egypt to Persia, ruling with unmatched military power. They built roads to move armies quickly, fielded ironclad troops, and pioneered siege engines that crushed city walls. Their kings boasted of flaying enemies alive and deporting entire populations. Acts meant as much to terrify as to punish. The Assyrians didn't just fight wars. They invented psychological warfare, spreading stories of cruelty and executions to frighten enemies into surrendering before a single arrow was fired. Their capital at Nineveh was one of the greatest cities of its time, with gardens, palaces, and Ashurbanipal's vast library, which preserved myths, laws, and scientific texts, a treasure of human knowledge. But fear breeds resentment. Their empire, stretched too thin and full of uprisings, collapsed when a coalition of Babylonians and Medes stormed Nineveh in 612 BCE. Today, broken palaces and carved reliefs in northern Iraq are all that remain, yet the Assyrians gave us something enduring. The first great libraries proving that even empires built on conquest can leave behind wisdom. When Assyria fell, Babylon rose again in 626 BCE, ushering in the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the city became the glittering jewel of Mesopotamia. Its massive defensive walls stretched for miles, its gates adorned with vivid blue tiles and roaring lions. Visitors entered through the Ishtar Gate, one of the most breathtaking monuments ever built. Inside the city, towering temples and palaces reflected Babylon's wealth and power. Legend tells of the hanging gardens, built to soothe a queen longing for her homeland's greenery. A wonder so extraordinary, it became one of the 7 wonders of the world. Babylon also flourished in learning. Its scholars charted the skies, calculated lunar cycles, and laid foundations for modern astronomy and mathematics. At its height, Babylon was the pride of the ancient world, its name synonymous with grandeur. Yet splendor can't always outlast politics. After Nebuchadnezzar's death, weak rulers followed, and in 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia captured the city with barely a fight. Babylon eventually crumbled, but its majesty still captivates us. Today, you can walk past the reconstructed Ishtar Gate in Berlin, and in Iraq, its ruins whisper of a city once known as the Gate of the Gods. Centuries before Babylon, Sargon of Akkad carved out history's first empire around 2334 BCE. Rising from humble origins, abandoned as a baby in a basket on a river, Sargon forged an empire that united Mesopotamia's city-states under one banner. The Akkadians expanded relentlessly, their armies marching as far as the Mediterranean, their language becoming the region's lingua franca. At its height, the Akkadian Empire created new standards of administration, taxes, governors, and a standing army. For over a century, it held together diverse peoples, linking trade routes and spreading culture across Mesopotamia. Akkad was a beacon of unity and ambition, the model all later empires would follow. But empires, like men, can falter. Severe droughts brought famine, rebellions tore at its edges, and waves of Gutian invaders delivered the final blow. By 2150 BCE, the empire was gone. Yet strangely, the capital city itself has never been found, a ghost in the desert sands. Though its monuments vanished, its legacy lives in every empire that rose after it. In 1046 BCE, the Zhou toppled the Shang and began the longest dynasty in Chinese history. They justified their rule with the mandate of heaven, the belief that rulers held power only so long as they governed wisely. This idea gave birth to the dynastic cycle, a pattern that would guide Chinese politics for 2,000 years. The Western Zhou era saw agricultural innovation, mastery of iron and bronze, and cultural expansion. Great walled cities grew, trade networks thrived, and Chinese identity began to take shape. At its prime, Zhou China was a land of progress and philosophy, producing influential texts and ceremonial traditions that endured through the ages. But as the centuries passed, their feudal system bred powerful lords who challenged the throne. By the Eastern Zhou, unity had fractured, but out of this chaos came philosophy. Confucius teaching morality and governance, Laozi envisioning harmony with nature, and hundreds of schools of thought sparking debates still studied today. The Zhou's political power waned, and in 256 BCE, they were overtaken by the Qin. Today, their tombs and artifacts still lie beneath Chinese soil. Yet their most enduring monument isn't stone, it's the mandate of heaven, an idea that shaped empires for centuries. Long before the classical world, the Mycenaeans dominated the Aegean from about 1600 BCE. Their kings ruled from palaces atop fortified citadels like Mycenae and Tiryns. their walls so massive they were said to be the work of giants. These were a warrior people, armed with bronze weapons, navigating the seas and building trade networks across the Mediterranean. They amassed wealth and power, leaving behind golden masks, elaborate tombs, and the earliest form of Greek writing, Linear B. At their peak, they controlled trade routes, levied tribute, and developed a culture rich in craftsmanship and religion. In legend, they became the heroes of the Trojan War, remembered in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. In reality, they faced enemies in famine, raids, and the sweeping Bronze Age collapse. By 1100 BCE, their palaces fell, their society fractured, and Greece entered a dark age. But their ruins remain. The Lion Gate, the Beehive tombs, silent witnesses to their greatness. And only in the 1950s was Linear B deciphered, revealing the Mycenaeans as the first Greeks, not myth, but history. Far from Europe and Asia, a monumental city rose in southern Africa between the 11th and 15th centuries CE. Built by the Shona people, Great Zimbabwe became a hub of power and wealth, commanding trade routes that linked Africa's gold and ivory to merchants as far as the Middle East and India. Its massive stone enclosures, built without mortar, sprawled across the landscape, housing thousands and showcasing engineering unmatched in the region. At its height, between the 13th and 15th centuries, it rivaled the world's great cities in scale and influence. Merchants from distant lands arrived with beads, glass, and fabrics, exchanging them for the riches of Africa's interior. Great Zimbabwe's stone walls, some stretching over 30 feet high, stood as a symbol of permanence and pride. But shifting trade patterns and environmental strain weakened it. And by the 16th century, it was abandoned. The ruins still stand in Zimbabwe today, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. For centuries, outsiders denied Africans could have built such a place, crediting it instead to Phoenicians, Arabs, even Atlantis. Only modern archaeology revealed the truth. Great Zimbabwe remains a reminder that history is often rewritten by those in power and rediscovered centuries later. So which empire do you think left the deepest mark on our world? Subscribe for more videos like this, and we will see you again in the next video.